Hi everyone, it is Marie here from Skeins, day 8 of the quarantine diaries, and it is Thursday, the 2nd of April. I actually had to think for a moment what day of the week it is. It's sort of, there are no such things as weekdays or weekends or anything anymore, it feels like but it's all good. I'm here and I'm really excited. I've been looking forward to this all week. I'm so excited about this because joining me on the line from the USA is the wonderful Charles Gandy. And Charles is somebody who I brought to Knit August Nights 3 years ago. And he has been around New Zealand. In fact, you've visited New Zealand a few times. And I've been chatting to Charles actually before we went live. It's so good to have you, Charles. And it's been great to finally catch up. It's been far too long.
Hi, everybody. How are you all? It's so nice to speak to my Kiwi friends again.
Yeah, it is so good.
I hope you all are enjoying your bubbles. I hear that's your term. We don't use that term here, but I like it. I think I'm going to adopt
it. Yeah, yes, everybody has a bubble here, and it's so nice with the quarantine diaries because we're able to virtually stretch our bubbles to bring in people like you. And as I was saying to you off air, I was interviewing Ethan earlier in the week from Outlaw Yarn, and Ethan has been working on the Master of Knitting, and he's just I think he's just completed level 2, and I thought, wow, actually this is something that most Kiwis especially will not be aware of, and it's something that I know you and I talked about a lot when you were here, and I thought, well, you know more about this than most, and I wanted to get you on. Explain to Kiwis, what is the Master of Knitting program, how does it work, and what are the benefits as a knitter that you can actually achieve if you ever considered doing something like this?
Well, of course I'm passionate about it. I was thinking, because you and I had mentioned that maybe we would talk about this, I think that I went through it's called the Master Knitting Program. It's put on by TKGA, the Knitting Guild Association. You can find out about it by going online, and the site is tkga.org, tkga.org. I think I went through it in 2010 or 2011. It is a 3-level course. It's self-driven. The organization TKGA administers it. It is based here in the United States, but we certainly have people from all over the world that participate in it. I don't know the current number, but there are about 300 or 325 of us that have passed this course. So it is not for the faint of heart. It's something that you will love, and at the same time you will hate. And they use me as an example. I will tell you my story because it's the kind of thing, if I can get through it, anybody can get through it. I sailed through the first level. Let me back up and tell you that basically, and let me say that it's been a number of years since I actually was on the committee that reviewed people after I finished it. Then they asked me to serve on the committee to review things. But it's been a number of years since I did that. So I'm not going to be specific about what the current standards are. I would refer you to the website because that way you'll get the current information. But it's generally the same as when I went through it. And that is, it's a 3-level program. You do the first level, and then you do the second level, and then you do the third level. You get all the information through online. You do a binder. Each binder has about 15 or 20 swatches that you have to knit that are asking you to knit particular things, that we're asking you to do specific things to look at your proficiency in certain things. You then have to answer a battery of questions that relate to those swatches. You have to then do documentation for your answers. You can't just answer the questions because that's the way your mother taught you to do it. You have to back it up with documentation. You then have to do some kind of a report. Like I think, or at least when I did it, the first level report, you had to do a report on blocking, which is very important. You may think you know how to block, but you have to actually document it and back it up with reference material. You find out that you will learn a lot about it. Then there's always a project or two where you have to actually knit something based on whatever the requirements are. So you put all of this in a binder and or a box, and you send it off to reviewers. In the first level, there is one reviewer and a co-chair. You only see the comments from the co-chair, and that person gets back to you and sends you a letter, and they say, you're a very good knitter. However, we saw on swatch number 2 that you didn't do this quite right. We'd like for you to look at that again. And on question number 6, we don't really like the answer of this, and we think maybe you need a little more investigation about that, so forth and so on. Anyway, then you resubmit those things, and finally you get a letter back saying, congratulations, you have passed level 1. You may now proceed to level 2. So I sent off my level 1, and it took me about 6 or 8 weeks to do level 1. It took about 4 or 5 weeks to get level 1 back. I get the letter back, and it says, you are just a fabulous knitter, and my head swelled up about the size of a basketball. And, you know, you need to do this, you need to do that, but it was 1 page. And I thought, I am the best thing since sliced bread. I'm the best knitter in the world, right? So I redid everything, and I sent it off, and then I got level 2. And I sat down, and I did 6 or 8 weeks worth of work, and I sent level 2 off. Well, are you ready? I got back my first reject letter. Remember level 1, I got 1 page back. Level 2, I got back 15 pages, single space.
Oh, that would definitely
that I had done wrong.
Yeah, that would definitely deflate the ego, wouldn't it?
Well, so I thought, you know, to heck with this, and I almost just said, I'm over this. So then I sat down and I read it again, and I thought, well, maybe okay, I'll redo it. So I redid it, and I sent it off, and I got the second reject letter back. Well, it was 9 pages, single space. I had improved. But by this time, I was mad. So I buckled down, and I redid it, and finally, after the 3rd letter, I got back that I had passed level 2. So then I finally did level 3, and I sent that off. And midstream of while it was being judged, I get a call from Miranda Holliday, who was then the chair and still is the chair of TKGA. And Miranda called me and said, Charles, we would like for you to be on the committee to review these things. And I said, Miranda, I haven't passed level 3. And she said, you will. The word had gotten out from the reviewers that my level 3 was so good because I guess I had just determined I was going to prove to them that I could do it. So now that everybody knows this story about me, that I was so bad in level 2, but level 3 was so good that they then asked me to be on the committee, and the rest is history. But
isn't
but
isn't that important?
Well, I think it is important to know because I had been knitting. You know, I learned to knit when I was 4 years old, and I went through this thing in my 60s. So I thought, well, I know how to knit, but the difference is that this program takes your knitting from being homemade to handmade.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and I now understand what I call the architecture of knitting. You know, I understand what it takes to make a stitch, and I understand, and I'll give you one very specific example, and there are probably 100 things that I learned about this. I mean, I really did think I knew how to knit before I did this, but I really know how to knit now, and I really care about every stitch now. But I'll give you one example. You know, SSKs are supposed to mimic knit two togethers.
Yeah.
SSKs lean to the left, and knit two togethers lean to the right. So I would go on Ravelry. There's a good forum on Ravelry where all of us that are going through this program would get together and kind of share ideas and maybe share some pictures and things. And I would see people's swatches, and their swatches, their SSKs and their knit two togethers did kind of mimic one another's, but mine never looked quite the same. My SSKs were not nearly as neat and clean and pretty. Well, through research, I found out that I was stretching my SSK.
Yeah.
And so now what I do when when I get to an SSK now, I stop and I slow down and I just work on the tips of my needles. And I just slip, knit, slip, knit. And now my SSKs are beautiful.
Yeah.
And they look really good. And, so it's just things like that. I mean, and now I do what I call my Saturday knitting. They may be 50 ways to make a bauble. Well, I have the way I like to make a bauble because one Saturday, and the other thing is, I now probably have a knitting library of 500 books or so, because every time, I love to buy and get and research and read knitting books. And I know which ones are good and which ones are not so good. But I also know there are 50 ways to make a bauble. So what I'll do is one Saturday when I don't have anything else to do, I'll get down every book I can find on how to make a bauble, and I'll make all of them. And I'll note about the ways to make them. And then I'll figure out which is the best way for me to make a bauble.
Yeah.
And why I like that bauble. And, sometimes one bauble is better in a garment than another bauble for that particular garment. So it's nice to be able to have a repertoire, if you will, to know, okay, in this garment or in this project, I want to do this bauble. Yeah. And this is why I want to do this bauble.
And I can complete.
Am I making any sense?
Absolutely, because I've just completed your kiwi hat, which you've just recently designed, and you knit it in Outlaw Bohemia Sport, and it's just utterly beautiful, and it's using those wonderful reverse traveling stitches, which I think are just amazing. And I'll get you to explain the inspiration for that hat in a moment. But when you sent me the pattern during its development, and I'm sorry it took me so long to get it done, but one of the things that I was really intrigued about is knowing that you were completing it in Bohemia Sport. I saw, the crispness of the stitches, I saw those bobbles, and I thought, for me, being someone not only as a yarn retailer, but working in new product development, creating new hand knitting yarns, I was really keen to try a different yarn and a different weight and a different construction to see how that pattern translated with those elements like bobbles, because bobbles are, there's a load of different elements, and the texture and the composition of a yarn can greatly either enhance or diminish a design if you don't get those sort of selections right. So I chose a heavier weight of yarn than what you used. I used a double knitting yarn that was on a twist-on-twist tubular construction. So it was very, very smooth, had very defined stitch definition, but I knitted it.
I bet it looks great, doesn't it?
It does, and I wanted to, because as you said, architectural, you used that word before, and I completely agree. The design itself, and I'll get you to explain that in just a sec, is I did it with a very firm intention, because I felt that I wanted to really accentuate the architectural character of that design. And often a lot of garments or patterns are made with gauge, which I have a real thing about sloppy, loose gauge, particularly with garments. And I really wanted to do something which allowed the design to hold up. And be something that was not only beautiful but extremely wearable. And you unless you do what you do, unless you sit down and try these things and actually run through a process, you just won't know. It is sometimes it is a trial and error. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Walk us through the kiwi hat, because the kiwi hat has, obviously by its name, has its inspiration based here in New Zealand, and it's a stunning pattern. I really enjoyed knitting it. And as I've said to a number of people that have looked at the samples that we have at the store, and as I was going through the process, I know that this appears difficult, but once you actually start working the pattern, it's incredibly intuitive. It's very easy to read where you're going next. And I just found that as each round went up, I just was waiting for the next round. It was one of those patterns. So tell us about that. Tell us about the development of that.
Well, you actually have the sample that I made.
I do. I love it.
Yeah, you have the original sample that I made with the Bohemian Sport. Well, let me say a couple of things about that. First of all, the bobble that I used in that is a very unusual bobble in that it's done on one row, and it's very tight and tiny little interesting bobble. And that's one of those examples of had I not done that exercise of the 50 bobbles on Saturday, I would not have known about that bobble. And so, and I chose that bobble purposely because I needed to get a lot of bobbles in that hat.
Yeah.
And if you'd done a more classic traditional bobble, I wouldn't have been able to have gotten those bobbles in there. So that's an example of where had I not gone through the master's program, I wouldn't have known about that bobble. So just technically that would do it. So let me back up and talk about the Kiwi hat. After I was at Con with you, and thank you very much for inviting me to come there. I loved my time with you there. It was fun, and I hope I get to come back sometime. Hint, hint. Anyway, after I left you, I went up to Auckland to do some presentations with the guild up there, and my friend Kurt Payne, which I know some of you know. Kurt, the fabulous knitter, and Kurt and I were just walking around the city of Auckland, and we went onto the campus of the University of Auckland, and there in the midst of that campus is this wonderful clock tower. Well, I've traveled a lot all over the world, and everywhere I go, I always like to seek something that inspires me to do something knit-wise. In fact, if you go on my Ravelry page, Charles Gandy Knits, you will see another hat that is called the Hallgrim hat. And the Hallgrim hat is inspired by the iconic church in Reykjavik, Iceland. That is a 1928 kind of contemporary Gothic church. And it also is a twisted traveling stitch pattern. I like twisted traveling stitches because if you're not familiar with twisted stitches, you knit in the back of every knit stitch, and usually they're done on a reverse, we call it stockinette stitch, you call it stocking stitch, I think. A reverse stocking stitch, so in other words, a background of purl stitches with this twisted knitted stitch there, and it makes that knit stitch just stand up.
Oh, yeah.
It's very architectural. And then they travel. It's literally like a one-stitch cable, for the lack of a better word. It comes from a Bavarian tradition. They're wonderful Bavarian socks that are, and many of those were knee socks. And if you really get into this, there's some great historical patterns of fabulous cotton socks that were knitted over the calves that are just intricate patterns, many times done on double zeros and triple zero needles. Go look at those, and they're wonderful, wonderful patterns. But the Bavarian twisted traveling stitches. Anyway, I use the twisted traveling stitches because they do allow themselves to do that kind of filigree architecture. If that's the right use of that word, I think it is. And that Gothic, that's kind of, that tower in Auckland kind of has that Gothic-y kind of filigree work there. And so as Kirk and I were walking through, I said, oh my goodness, look at that tower. That would make a great design for a hat. Well, after I left Kirk and I was traveling around all over New Zealand, I ended up having dinner with Deb Moore in Christchurch, who owns Outlaw Yarn. And I was telling her about this, and Deb said, oh, well, let me give you some yarn, and you can play with, if you're going to do a hat from New Zealand, you need to do it in New Zealand yarn. So, and I said, well, if I do it, I want to make sure it's the yarn that you sell in the United States. And she said, well, Bohemian, we sell there. So she gave me some yarn, and it took me only 2.5 years, but finally I get around to doing that hat. And it was an interesting process. Sometimes I should document how I got about to doing that. I had to simplify, but I do think I captured that hat. Capture the spirit of that tower.
Absolutely. I mean, particularly when you see the photos of the two of them together, you captured it beautifully.
Well, the nicest compliment I had, and I can't remember her name. You may know who it is, Marie, but I got a nice, enthusiastic comment from one of you Kiwi knitters, and her grandfather worked on that tower building it.
Wow.
And she was so excited to get the pattern and I've had lots of people to buy the pattern and send me nice notes to say they went to school there or whatever. And then if you go on Facebook and go to Kirk Payne, he just finished his version of the hat, and he just went to the campus just yesterday, I guess, and posted pictures, and he did all kinds of pictures, and he even put the hat on some famous statue there and took a picture of it. So that's kind of fun. But have I told you enough about that hat? I don't know. But,
no,
it was fun to do.
It was really fun to do.
And then after that, you might look, if you go to my Ravelry page, shortly after that, I did a third hat in that series, and I did one called the Notre Dame hat. And it's inspired by the rose window of Notre Dame. And it's a little simpler than, like Marie said, this one is not hard to do. It looks hard, but it's not. Are people scared of it? Do they think it's too difficult to do?
I think, well, yeah, but once you actually explain to them, I think it's because it's such a striking piece that they just instantly think, oh, that's just too hard, I can't do that. And when you actually explain to them, well, these traveling stitches, literally, you're just swapping one stitch to another, and you just need to knit in the back. And that's the thing, I think, the big thing that I found that helped explain it to people is they need to break it down round by round, row by row. And I think sometimes when you look at a project in its entirety and you think, oh gosh, there's no way I can do that, when actually you can, when you break down the aspects and the steps of that project to a single round or a single row, of course you can do it. It is actually, it's the building blocks.
Even simpler than that, it's a multiple of what, 12 or 14 stitches.
Yeah. It's
and I think if people would get used to using the chart, I think so many people, and I learned this, I think I asked you if I needed to write it out or if I could just do a chart. I love charts, and if you could ever get used to working with the chart, it makes it so much easier too. So if you break it down to where it's round by round and multiple by multiple, it's a multiple of what, 14 stitches or something. I don't remember.
Like that.
I don't have the chart in front of me. But it's really just 14 stitches done over and over and over again.
And it's one of the things I've actually encouraged people, because it's actually, because I bounce between the two charts and written instructions depending on, it's quite funny. For me, I prefer to do lace work written. I prefer to do cabled work or travelling stitch work in a chart. I don't know why. But in this particular instance, and in this instance, one of the things that I've really encouraged people to do is to use the chart, because when you use the chart, it is so easy to read. It's like a road map almost, to actually
you just see it. It's right there in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, well, thank you for that. Now, you mentioned before, you've got this
Let me say one more thing about that too, and you mentioned this too. I purposely made the gauge on that much tighter than normal, because you would never use that yarn for a sweater or a jumper in the gauge that I did. I think I did it 8 stitches to an inch or something. That's much too tight for a sweater, but I wanted it to have that architectural feeling about it, because that way those lines really stand out. So I think the gauge is important on that.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because it needs that tighter gauge.
And the other thing too with that yarn as well, in that tighter gauge, and I know the people that have seen that hat, either I had the hat at Stitches and I have the hat in the shop, because it is such a tight gauge, the bloom of the possum in that hat is incredible, because you've got so many stitches very close together, so you get a more exaggerated bloom than you normally would when it's at a looser gauge. So that also is it really accentuates the yarn quite a lot as well, which is quite good. Now, you mentioned before that you know
Marie, I never blocked that hat either, so you might try that and see. I bet it'll bloom even more. So I probably should have done that before I sent it to you.
No, it's wonderful. Now, you mentioned about your library of books, and and there was two elements to talk about this. One is, one of the things that I've been doing, particularly now that I have all this time on my hands, is I have been looking back. I've got quite an extensive library of books as well, not quite as large as yours, but I've been collecting them quite consistently over the last 20 odd years. And it has been nice, actually, as your skills and my skills as a knitter have improved over a number of years, is to actually go back and look at books that I've had for eons that I've not picked up for a long time, and I've loved and been inspired by them when I've had them, but then thought, oh, well, I would never give that a go, or I don't necessarily have the skills to do that, or and not do them. Whereas now I'm actually going back and I'm looking at them through fresh eyes and seeing the inspiration behind, you know, the marvel of those very, very simple skills and how incredible some of these designs are. And I know that, you know, your designs are very like this, but if, you know, Kath Fassett, Nora Gowan, who was one of my first design crushes, she uses a huge number of elements in her designs. And it is a really, I think, a really nice thing to do, is to actually look back if we've got those books and magazines. And I've been encouraging people whilst they've been in lockdown to do so. Now, I want to know, Charles, in your Airstream trailer, where do you keep all of these books?
That's what everybody wants to know. I have to be perfectly honest. Do people know that I live in an Airstream?
I have let them know that you have, you know, you have sort of gone into this, into the tiny trailer as opposed to the tiny house. And it, when you and I were together, you were working out how, you know, whether or not you were going to do your own tiny house, or what you were going to build for this next phase of your life. And then obviously you've come across the trailer. So there has to be a storage unit somewhere, Charles.
Yes, I think that we go by square feet. You go by square meters, and I can't calculate those. But in the States, to be a tiny house has to be 500 square feet or less. My Airstream is 200 square feet, so it is 8 feet wide and 27 feet long, and I live quite nicely. But yes, I do have a storage unit. And right now I actually have 3 storage units. I sold my house actually it was on the market for 5 years, and the realtors that were trying to sell my house could not sell it. And so I took it away from them and listed it on one of those online sell by owner kinds of places, and I sold it in an hour and a half. So how long does it take to sell a house? 5 years and an hour and a half. So I had 3 weeks to move, and so I rented 3 of those kind of metal. You all have these metal storage units.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do.
Well, we do too. They're kind of eyesores on our landscape, but they came in handy for me. But unfortunately, I did not pack as organized as I would like to. So right now, I have 3 of those units, and I have plans, or had plans, to build kind of I have 3.5 acres where I keep pearl, P-U-R-L, like we knit and we pearl. That's what I called my Airstream. We have to have a tag, an automobile tag for a license tag. So my tag is what we call a vanity tag, and it's pearl. And so Pearl and I go. In fact, I have a Facebook page called Pearling Across America. People can follow me. And I've been all the way. I live in Georgia, which is down south in the United States, and I had been all the way 2,000 miles to Vermont and New York, and I had been 3,000 miles to California and back. I was scheduled to go to Colorado, just leaving next week, but I was going to teach out there, but that's of course been canceled because of our current situation. But anyway, so I travel a lot in Pearl, and what I do is I'm going to eventually get my storerooms organized better. I have 3 of them now. I'm going to eventually get them down to 2. One of them is going to be a storeroom where it's truly a storeroom, and the other one is going to be more like a working studio, if you will, where I can do that. But I have, believe it or not, there's a bit of storage in Pearl, and I am not one of these people that works on multiple knitting projects at once. I learned a long time ago, I have to work on one project have a few little odds and ends of projects that are beginning. Like right now, I'm working on. I just found out yesterday that a new sock project that I've submitted to a magazine has been accepted. So I'm kind of swatching for that.
Yeah.
But I've also now in the midst of a sweater. So I really try to work on one project and get that finished. But I have bins where I keep some yarn in my bed, for instance, is a queen size bed and it lifts up. So I have storage all underneath there. I have a decent closet for my clothes. But my books, what I do is I go to my warehouse, and if I can find the book I need, I pull it out and I bring it back. So I ship things back and forth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So,
it does.
But I need to be more organized than I am. And do as I say, not as I do.
No, absolutely, completely. I think all of us are a bit like that, Charles. So I wouldn't worry about that too much.
Yeah. One of the big mistakes I think I made years ago was to accumulate a huge yarn stash. I wish I had not done that, because I find that even though I have this huge yarn stash, even when I could see it and get to it, which I can as well now, I never really used it. I would always go buy new yarn.
Yeah.
So I wish I had not done that. I mean, I could sit from now to doomsday and never use the yarn that I have, but I still would go to the yarn store and buy new yarn. So,
yeah.
I don't know what I'm going to do with all that yarn I have in storage.
Charles,
that's another story.
Shh. I'm a yarn retailer, Charles. Shh.
Well, no, I'm saying that I go buy new yarn now.
I know you do. And it's funny because during this lockdown here in New Zealand, one of the things I've been encouraging people to do, and it's been one of our overriding themes on the Quarantine Diaries, is encouraging people to use the yarn that they have stashed, because I mean you saw mine when you were here. I mean I sort of started stashing, and then for me as well, I mean, because I travel and I go to other stores and I have the event, and you end up buying things. But it's really interesting. I mean, I'm buying less yarn now than I've ever bought before, and I've become more conscious about trying to incorporate yarns that I have stashed. And it's a little bit like, sometimes I find I'll go through and it's a bit like finding that piece item in your wardrobe that got tucked at the very back that you actually forgot was there. And you're like, wow, that's amazing. I remember why I bought this. This is incredible. Why is it just sitting in the back of a cupboard? It needs to be worked up into something and appreciated. So, yeah, I think that is certainly something we need to do.
I know that when I finally do get to my stash and can go through it, it's gonna be like Christmas. I'm gonna find all these wonderful things and think, oh, how wonderful is this? But and I am, luckily I told somebody I really kind of like this isolation thing that we're going through now, because I'm getting a lot of stuff done. Yeah. So I may just adopt this whole new lifestyle and I may tell people I'm isolated for good,
No, I hear you. I have to admit I've got more done in the last week. Little jobs that I have been meaning to get done. I have to admit I'm with you on that. Well, look, Charles, it has been an utter joy to speak to you today. It's been so good to catch up. We are done, but don't you disappear anywhere. I'm going to wrap this up, and then you and I can keep talking after I send everybody on their way.
You said when we were setting this up, we wouldn't have any trouble talking. I hope people have enjoyed this. Did you get feedback from this? I don't know.
No, Charles. I am, my friend, and it's been utterly wonderful to catch up with you. So you stay on the line. I will talk to you just in a sec. But for everyone out there, I hope you've enjoyed the chat today with Charles. I've absolutely adored it. Saturday, I'm catching up with Ethan again. We're going to be talking around the designs, particularly around the designs of Stephen West. As you can see, I have a design over my shoulder there, and he and I've decided to make it a pajama party, so because it's Saturday and we can. So I expect you with your cuppa and your PJs and your knitting, and come and see us on Saturday and join Ethan and I for that. But I'll be back tomorrow talking about progress on the Rambler sweater, and I'll dig something else up to chat about. But until then, have a great day, and I will be back again 11 o'clock tomorrow. Bye.